currently working at night pumping through payday work experience. For me, mentoring is important because it changed my life around. Um, I was giving up on myself, and especially Diane helped me a lot to see how the world is, and it's took me like a year, and my life changed completely. Like I got my license. Life is getting easier, and if we really want to change, garden pathway is the way. Um, what they tell you, that's what they do. So they don't lie to you.
How did mentoring help you? Like, what were the things that really stood out to you that helped you in making those changes?
Uh, the advices that you gave me, that especially how to live my life and how to get my license. When I got my forklift permit, that's been helping me at work with, and and they told me I wasn't gonna be able to get my license, and I didn't want to get it no more. But you guide me the right way, and man, life is beautiful. God, I, not even myself, I can believe the way my life changed, and so thank you guys, and
How has that impacted your family?
it's it's amazing because I couldn't even stay at my parents' house. They didn't trust me no more, and now they went to my country, to Guatemala, and I stay at the house. My whole family cannot believe the way my life changed, and even people from I grew up in Lamont, so everybody knows everybody, and there's a lot of people that are changing because they see the way I changed. So it's amazing. I was irresponsible. I was drinking. Um, I didn't care. For me, I didn't care if I was alive or not, and now I care. Like it's even even the cops, they knew who I was. They didn't need no ID. They were like, "Oh, Efren," like, "Oh man," like now they see me and they're like, "Hey, I'm proud of you," and this and that, and it's I didn't. I used to go to work or get easy money. Now I work and earn my money the right way, and it's a big difference.
How does it feel to have your little girls too?
Oh man, that's that's something that little by little is getting better and better. And actually, the weekends, every single weekend, they spend the time with me. They're with me. We go eat whatever they want. We go out whatever they want to go, and uh, it's sometimes I can't believe that how my life changed around.
And some of the things when you say now you have your own car, you have a good license record, right?
I have my license. I have insurance. I'm almost done with all my fines, and I started working in the fields. And from the fields, little by little, you guys helped me, and now I'm working at night pumps. And they told me today, actually today, they told me that like in 30 days or something like that, they're gonna hire me with the company.
Wow.
And everybody got a bonus check, and actually they gave me one too. And I don't work with the company, and still I got one. So
How did that make you feel?
it's something that I can't believe sometimes. It's something that I know I'm doing everything the right way, but I know I don't deserve all this, but God knows what He's doing. God knows what He's doing. Now I see that I'm worth something, and before I didn't care. Before I was doing the wrong things, and I see that life is means a lot, and I care about myself now. Before I didn't care.
Would you recommend mentoring
Oh, definitely,
to other
definitely.
people?
it's amazing because I didn't want to do this. Um, a friend, he didn't want to come by. He was enrolled already, so I told him, "Let's go. I'll go with you." But I didn't know I was gonna end up doing it, and thank God I did. So God works mysteriously, and I'm here, and I'm gonna put 110% to keep going forward. It's Man, it's a blessing being with you guys. It's a blessing.
Volume, you're muted.
All right, sorry about that, guys. My computer screen went blank there for a minute. But thank you and good afternoon. We want to welcome you to the fourth and final session of this year's Hope Through Mentoring Conference. And today we're going to hear from Stephanie Guzman on trauma-informed care. Stephanie is a clinical social worker who currently works in an emergency department here in Bakersfield, and she has experience in clinical settings that range from schools and clinics to hospitals. Stephanie is actively involved in many Kern County community initiatives, including the Kern Coalition Against Human Trafficking, Links for Life Cancer Society, and she's currently a leader for the Trauma Informed Kern County Initiative. Stephanie has trained over 3,000 community members within Kern County on trauma-informed principles. She's currently providing trauma-informed care training across the valley with Resilient Kern. She's passionate about working with children and helping others do the same. In 2018, Stephanie was recognized for her work by the International School Safety Institute for helping at-risk youth turn their lives around for the better and received the Individual School Safety Award for it. She continues to do research to ensure her training includes the latest evidence-based practices. If you have any questions throughout Stephanie's training, please enter them into the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen, and they'll be answered at the end of the session. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Stephanie so we can hear everything she has to share.
Thank you so much, Anne. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. So first and foremost, welcome everybody, and thank you for taking time out of your day today to join me. I hope that you get one good thing out of the training, if not many. And remember, please write your questions down, and there is no such thing as a ridiculous question. All questions are important, and usually more than one person is thinking the same thing. So again, my name is Stephanie Guzman. I'm a clinical social worker, and today we are going to be talking about childhood trauma and its result, which is toxic stress, through a trauma-informed care lens. Slide. So this is the agenda, and on this agenda slide as well, I put a Google link. This link will lead you to a wealth of knowledge in regards to childhood trauma and toxic stress. So just over the years, I've been putting together just articles and little handouts that I think would be beneficial to many different professions. So look through it and feel free to download and take what you'd like. And on top of that, we're going to be talking about the foundations. I want us to be able to understand what trauma is, and then its symptoms, meaning what is it going to look like, and how are we going to be able to identify what trauma is. We're going to be talking about adverse childhood experiences. I'm going to give a brief overview about what ACEs are and exactly how that ties in to trauma. And then we will talk about toxic stress. Toxic stress is a result of adversity, so a result of ACEs, and I will tie all that together and explain that. And then towards the end, we're going to talk about becoming trauma-informed. So basically, what does that mean? What does it look like? And what strategies can we employ as individuals to ensure that we're being trauma-informed when we are mentoring others? And then lastly, of course, the mentor role. How could they be best fit into being not only trauma-informed, but the best individual and point of contact for someone else? Slide. So I generally always like to start off with statistics. I want to know the data. Why do we want to know about trauma-informed care? Why is everybody always talking about it? And what does it have to do with me? We all live here in Kern County, and if you don't reside here in Kern County, your county, I'm sure, has similar data statistics as well. But I want to put into perspective, 15,079 Kern County children were suspected of being abused or neglected. That's 41 children each day. Now, 2,741, and again, that's 8 children every day, were later found to be victims. That means there are 2,741 children who have been confirmed to have been abused, neglected, sexually abused, have been victims of domestic violence. Something has occurred that has ended in resulting them in the Child Protective Services. So again, I want us to put into perspective with these numbers why we need to become a trauma-informed community. About 30% of those 2,741 children of abused or neglected children will later abuse their own children. So that's how the cycle kind of continues. And a lot of this information is important for us so that we could better understand not only the population that we're serving, but how generational trauma occurs. In 2019, we had 2 child fatalities, which were determined to be abuse or neglect by law enforcement or the coroner, and 14 severe, serious injuries due to abuse or neglect. This is here in our hometown. Now, remember, these children are going to grow up and become the adults that are later going to need the same services, or some services, I should say. Slide. Thank you. So let's start with understanding childhood trauma. I'm very passionate about this work, and so please, again, feel free to ask questions. And I'd love at the end of it for us to kind of just hash it out and have a conversation. So childhood trauma. Trauma is really the experience one has with the event. And remember, childhood trauma is in the eye of the beholder, okay? It is a feeling that leaves one feeling hopeless or helpless, powerless, and ultimately results in symptoms. And we'll get to that. Slide. I like to make sure that when I define the term trauma, that I define it holistically, all the way around. Okay, so what I mean by that is that we have to understand that trauma can refer to a single event. It could have happened just once, or a series of events, or a set of circumstances that are experienced as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, that it overwhelms that person's ability to cope and ultimately has lasting effects on the person's mental, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. Summing that up, it's an event or a circumstance that happens that it doesn't allow for us to be that same person we were before it happened. And a lot of these things a lot of the things that we end up facing in adulthood stem from our childhood. So when we talk about childhood trauma, I'm going to also connect it to as in adulthood. But nonetheless, I want us to also understand that trauma is a perspective, right? So you could have 2 children in the same exact family experiencing the same exact types of abuse or neglect or community violence and have two totally different outcomes. Because again, it is how that specific individual perceives that trauma that is going to ultimately determine how they end up feeling or doing physically, emotionally, or psychologically. So the events that children may face at school or in their families and communities come in many forms and range from one-time accidents to experiences that are chronic or even generational. So such as abuse, neglect, or exposure to violence. And that's when I say domestic violence. Because domestic violence, although maybe the children aren't physically being hit, affects them the same way as physical violence. And we can talk a little bit about that later. And again, that same experience or event occurs to different people and to totally different outcomes. Because again, trauma is determined by us. Slide. So what is trauma? Again, I've been giving all of these definitions, and the reason why I'm reiterating is so that we better understand how many multitudes of, well, varieties of trauma that we can really be talking about. So a trauma is an experience in which powerful and dangerous events overwhelm a person's capacity to cope, right? Meaning they are no longer that same person. The experience does not have to be life-threatening to trigger a trauma response. Has anybody ever been told by someone, like, oh, be grateful, you know, you're fine, you didn't die, you know, you need to get over it? That not only is it probably the wrong thing to say to someone, again, trauma is a perspective and it is how someone feels. Maybe it didn't affect you and maybe you don't see it as being traumatic or even life-changing. To that person, it was. So when we think of types of trauma, I want us to think complex trauma. There are acute traumas as well, which we had read earlier about in the slide where I said it could be a one-time event or it could have been a short duration. But there are accidents, natural disasters, isolated crimes, terrorist attacks. These types of things, although acute, can have lasting effects. We have complex trauma, which is what we'll learn more about throughout this presentation and how it pertains and ties into childhood trauma. But it's chronic, means it happens for a long period of time and it's generally intentional. It was done on purpose and usually by our caregivers. I added poverty on here as a complex trauma, as the research does prove that poverty is considered a complex trauma. Not that it is that, you know, people who have no money or they're just going to be less fortunate and things like that. No, generally with poverty comes addiction. With poverty comes lack of housing. With poverty generally comes lack of nutritional food, lack of education, resources. Those types of things are what plays a factor when we think of complex trauma and poverty. Then we have sexual and physical abuse, severe neglect. And with neglect, I want us to keep in mind, neglect means that children are not being provided their basic needs. A basic need is food, hygiene, and housing. Okay, those three things. That means severe neglect is meaning the children are not eating. The children are not bathing. They're not getting medical attention. So that's what we mean by severe neglect. Homelessness. Again, this is put on here because research is showing that with homelessness, again, there are other factors that tie into that piece. Children who lack adequate housing, which again is a basic need, tend to not have their other needs met as well and can ultimately result in other health problems. And we'll learn about that. Then we have violence exposure, whether it be community or domestic violence. These complex traumas ultimately have the ability to result in toxic stress, which will again result in other health-related problems. Slide. ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. You know, normally when I have this presentation, I always like to ask how many of us have heard this before? And there's always going to be like a 50-50. When we work in positions where we're touching the lives of those who have experienced any type of traumatic situation, it is in our best interest to understand what they may have gone through, or understand just how what they've gone through affects them as individuals. One of the best things about knowing about this type of work is how it affects you as well as an individual. A lot of the things that we've experienced in our own past, in our childhood, affects who we are as adults through our personality, through our spirituality, emotionally. And we're going to learn about that. And so with all of this information here, I want us to also be thinking about ourselves. How do ACEs play a role in our lives? You know, and because again, it'll teach us a lot of self-awareness about who we are and how we are. That's a side note. Adverse childhood experiences can have a significant impact on child development. And again, I understand that this PowerPoint is geared towards children, but again, children grow up. And in adulthood, these effects that occurred here during childhood still will be affecting the adult later in life, whether it be yourself or the people or population that you're serving within your organization. So my goal again, to put into perspective what it is we're doing and how we could help. Next slide, please. So I'm going to play this video so that it could explain it just probably a little better than I could. Can everybody else hear it? Andrea, you will have to unmute, I think, to hear your computer audio. I bet we all are like over the whole Zoom and all of this stuff. Thank you.
What does your parents' divorce have to do with your risk for heart disease? If your mother had a drinking problem when you were growing up, are you more likely to suffer from depression as an adult? Here's what you should know about ACEs. ACEs stand for Adverse Childhood Experiences, extremely stressful events that can happen to a child growing up. Some experiences are so stressful that they can alter brain development, as well as the immune system, increasing the risk of lifelong health and social problems in adulthood. The term comes from the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, landmark research that shed new light on the root cause of everything from stroke and liver disease to substance abuse and mental illness. In the late 1990s, an epidemiologist from the Centers for Disease Control and a preventive medicine doctor at Kaiser Permanente set out to understand the association between childhood experience and lifelong health. They asked over 17,000 people in the Kaiser Health Plan in San Diego about their health history, as well as difficult questions about their experiences growing up. Anda and Felitti tallied up 10 different kinds of adversity in this largely middle-class and college-educated population. They were stunned to see how common ACEs were. 21% of all respondents were sexually abused as children. 19% grew up with someone who suffered mental illness. 28% had been physically abused. And 2 out of 3 respondents had experienced at least one ACE. The researchers next looked at how someone's ACE score, or the number of adversities they experienced, related to a wide array of serious health and social problems. They saw that the more ACEs someone had, the greater their risk for poor outcomes compared with someone with no ACEs. Someone with an ACE score of 4 had twice the risk of heart disease and cancer. Someone with an ACE score of 5 had an 8 times greater chance of being an alcoholic. And those with an ACE score of 6 or more, on average, died 20 years earlier. With every major problem they looked at in the ACE study, the risk went up for each additional adverse experience in childhood. As Dr. Robert Anda says, what's predictable is preventable. It's important to remember that ACEs are not destiny. ACEs are a tool for understanding the health of a population as a whole. For individuals, an ACE score can be a tool for understanding their own risk for health and social problems, and empower them to make changes for themselves and their children. ACEs tend to get passed down from generation to generation and are common across all income levels, races, and cultures. But increasingly, people of all different professions and backgrounds are coming together to discuss how ACEs affect their communities. They're finding new ways to treat and prevent ACEs. Many doctors are starting to screen their patients for ACEs as part of their medical history. More schools are becoming trauma-informed, considering the source of problem behavior when disciplining their students, instead of immediately suspending or expelling them. To learn more about interrupting the cycle of adversity and improving health and well-being for the next generation, please visit kpjrfilms.co.
Thank you. When we think about ACEs, I want us to not think of it in a negative way. Think of it as becoming aware, understanding something that is so complex, but yet makes so much sense. When we think about all of this, and I always ask this question too, and I know I can't see anybody, but how many of us found ourselves checking some of those boxes? By the way, that questionnaire will be in that Google Drive link that I sent you, and that handout is in there too. Because when we understand better about what we've experienced, and the more self-awareness that we gain about our own past, the better we are able to understand our own risk and ultimately change that cycle of adversity within our families. And it will always make us just a better individual and a better mentor, employee within our organization, everything, all the way around. ACEs are serious childhood traumas that can result in toxic stress, right? So here are the categories in which ACEs are from. And let's go ahead and take the next slide. Thank you. This pyramid here, it explains in a more complex way when we think of childhood adversity. When we think ACEs, and which is, again, remember those things from the previous slide, we have the divorce, we have all of those things, mental illness, incarcerated parents, addiction, sexual abuse, physical abuse. What ends up occurring is a disrupted neurodevelopment, meaning the brain starts to function differently. We have in our brain what's called a survival brain, and we're going to learn about that a little bit here. But that part of the brain becomes more dominant, that survival part, which then impairs that part of our brain that teaches us to be social, to be compassionate, to have emotions, and ultimately results in cognitive impairments. Such as, again, we have reading problems, we have learning problems, we have other types of mental health related problems, and then the adoption of high risk behaviors occur, such as alcohol, drugs, we've risky sexual behaviors, other things like that, which then ultimately leads to other health related problems. Children who are exposed to multiple ACEs are overloaded with stress, which means they are left in this constant state of survival. So it makes for the absorption of any new academic material very difficult, which is often why we see a lot of our children who come from, rougher backgrounds or have experienced any of these ACEs. They generally have learning deficiencies. I was going to say disabilities, but generally they're never even diagnosed with disabilities. We just kind of target them and sometimes call them bad kids, or we call them all these other things, when in reality, their brain was not functioning to its optimal levels because of the ACEs they had experienced. Next slide. So prolonged exposure to ACEs creates toxic stress, which can damage the developing brain and body of children and affect their overall health, right? That's what we've been learning here. When children experience a very stressful situation once or are exposed to a chronically stressful environment, their body's natural way of dealing with stress can actually become harmful to their bodies. So someone had asked me, so because I have an ACE score of 5 or more, now I'm going to get like heart disease? No, not necessarily. Is it a possibility? No, you are more at risk for potentially getting that, but that doesn't mean you automatically have it. What it means, though, is that the body's response system is working differently. And because of that, and depending on, of course, the severity of your ACEs and everything else, the toxic stress that you've experienced will affect other parts of our bodies and our brains. So slide. And again, I know this is a lot of information. And before we start to think negative, I want us to see it in a positive light, because again, the more we understand about all of this, the more we understand how we can start doing preventative work or changing the dynamics in which we as individuals are living, or helping those who we know that we're working with have experienced these types of adversities. And so that's the goal here. So I'm going to show us a video about toxic stress and what that looks like in the body.
Learning to deal with stress is an important part of healthy development. When experiencing stress, the stress response system is activated. The body and brain go on alert. There's an adrenaline rush, increased heart rate, and an increase in stress hormone levels. When the stress is relieved after a short time, or a young child receives support from caring adults, the stress response winds down and the body quickly returns to normal. In severe situations, such as ongoing abuse and neglect, where there is no caring adult to act as a buffer against the stress response stays activated. Even when there is no apparent physical harm, the extended absence of response from adults can activate the stress response system. Constant activation of the stress response overloads developing systems, with serious, lifelong consequences for the child. This is known as toxic stress. Over time, this results in a stress response system set permanently on high alert. In the areas of the brain dedicated to learning and reasoning, the neural connections that comprise brain architecture are weaker and fewer in number. Science shows that the prolonged activation of stress hormones in early childhood can actually reduce neural connections in these important areas of the brain at just the time when they should be growing new ones. Toxic stress can be avoided if we ensure that the environments in which children grow and develop are nurturing, stable, and engaging.
Thank you. As we could hear and see in that video there, at the time when children's brains should be developing and growing and just being full of life, when children experience these ACEs, it ends up decreasing those brain centers. And so that part that should be developing and growing and making the children smarter and better, it's not fully functioning. And so we're going to talk about that here in a bit. But before I do that, I want us to understand, though, that some stress is good. It is healthy. We need stress in order to pass the test, in order to be able to present in front of an audience over Zoom. We need these types of stressors in order to be able to, motivate ourselves. It is and that is positive stress. Then we have tolerable stress, which are those unfortunate stressors that maybe perhaps we're having a lot of right now, where there's family members in the hospital that we can't go visit, and it does take a toll on our bodies and it leaves us feeling overwhelmed. This is tolerable stress. It means that our family support systems, our friends or our mentors, all of these other buffers that we have will keep our bodies at bay. And when I mean at bay, I mean allow for us to get to that baseline of understanding that we're okay, we're safe. So it turns off that survival brain. And then we have toxic stress, which is what we just learned about in the video. And it's that type of stress that, again, it can ultimately damage a lot of the developing brain and, of course, our body. So understanding that there are 3 types of stress helps us better understand where we are when we become stressed. Slide. I tried to change the slide with my own hand. So what are the consequences of stress? If you've never experienced stress in your life, I would love to talk to you. So please stay on afterwards. But if you are like me, then you probably experience stress often, right? Just little things here and there bring a little bit of that, positive stress or even that tolerable stress. But toxic stress causes significant impairments in relationships and just daily activities in general. People who are worried about where they're going to get their next meal or where they're going to sleep, or those who are, suffering from addiction, they are experiencing toxic stress. And those are also the people who are going to have impairments in relationships, meaning they don't know how to be in a relationship. They don't know how to be kind in relationships, and just usually have numerous encounters that are not positive with the people around them. The stress consequences, it activates the sympathetic nervous response, right? So we learned in that video, it keeps them in a constant state. We're calling that constant state the fight, flight, freeze response. It's that survival part of the brain. It increases cortisol, which causes fatigue, muscle weakness, anxiety, irritability, and cognitive difficulties occur because when smart brain is turned on, which again is that center part of our brain, when that is turned on, smart brain has to turn off. We can't have both. And so, therefore, we will not make very good decisions, moral decisions, while we are in that survival part of our brain. So then we also get headaches. Some of us get stomach aches. All of these things are stress consequences. And when we become more self-aware, we're able to take notice of what it is our body is feeling. Especially for some of us who, have family that is experiencing high levels of stress, or, they may be experiencing some of these ACEs. We know now what it would look like for someone who is stressed out. Next slide, please. I want us to talk about the brain a little bit. And the reason why is because generally I don't talk about this too much, but as I'm understanding, there are a lot of mentors in this training, a lot of people who are going to be working with other people who have high levels of toxic stress, who ultimately probably have high ACE scores as too. I want us to understand what is happening in the brain so that we could learn that it's not personal. So next slide. So I have a picture of the brain here, right? That's the cortex is the front top, right? It controls the higher brain function, such as information processing. I call it the smart brain. The smart brain because it's the one who's going to make the better decisions. It is the one who is going to be able to say, that is not a good idea. That could cost us some time in prison. That's the smart brain. We have the limbic system. It's the portion of the brain that deals with three key functions: our emotions, our memories, and our arousal. So the thalamus is the part of the limbic system. It receives sensory input, okay? And it comes from the nervous system and passes into the cerebral cortex, which is that smart brain, and other parts of the brain as well, okay? So think of the thalamus as the front line. It's in the very beginning. Then we have the amygdala, which is part of the limbic system as well. This part controls our survival state, our alarm response, okay? So when the thalamus is working, and a lot of us who have, again, experienced unfortunate events in our lives or have high ACE scores, have you ever smelt something? And I guess this would go for anybody really, but smell something and it brought back a memory. And then that memory would bring back a feeling, whether that feeling be sadness or anger or guilt, even shame. That's your thalamus working. When we are experiencing high levels of toxic stress and we also too do not know how to regulate, the thalamus says, it takes us in, and then the brain goes into this little piece that says, oh, we're not going to chance it. Let's just send it to survival brain. We don't need a smart brain working for us right now because that smell, we smelled that when we were 5 years old and we almost died. Let's get over to survival brain. And then rash decisions are made. Impulsive responses are created. And that person is not who they were just a few seconds ago. Okay, so see how the arrows point up from the thalamus and go up to the cortex and then go down to the amygdala if needed. When there is no actual risk for potential harm or anything like that, the smart brain says, hey, we're okay. Yes, that happened to us when we were 4 years old, but that's not where we're at right now. This is a safe environment and the people around us, they like us. And so then the survival brain's like, okay, so I'm not needed. And then it doesn't come activated. So that example I want to give because I'm going to keep using it throughout the presentation about smart brain and survival brain, because it helps us to better understand also why sometimes people can kind of go into that heightened sense of awareness, such as like, oh my gosh, is this a safe place? Am I good? This is too much, and I'm out of here. And so it'll explain a lot of those types of responses. Next slide, please. The amygdala, again, I call it survival brain because it's a lot easier and cooler word. But this part of our brain, it is the part that protects us. It allows for the infants who are, experiencing ACEs to survive as well. And again, when that response system is turned on and it's never turned off by that loving, caring adult telling them and reassuring them like, hey, you're okay, you're fine, then it stays activated. And even in adulthood, you'll see that there are impulsive adults. There are adults who are real quick to say, you know what, we're fighting. We're going to do this or we're going to do that. And the reason for it, again, is because it stems from their childhood. The amygdala is going to prepare us, though, to fight. And so it's going to look like a loss of temper. It's going to be defensiveness. And we're going to talk about defensive coping strategies in a bit. And it looks like irritability, somebody who's always frustrated, somebody who is not someone you want to be around. And then we've got flight, which is avoidance, anxiety, fear. Then we have the freeze, which is the numbing, the detachment. This is also those who are just saying, you know what, I'd rather not do that just so I don't get hurt. Okay, so that's a lot of what that looks like. Next slide, please. So from the top down versus the bottom up, okay? When we say bottom up, and I say we, like there's other people here but me, we're thinking from survival to smart brain, okay? So a child who grows up in a safe and predictable environment, predictable means that when the child knows that he's hungry, he knows he's going to be fed. When the child knows that his diaper is dirty, he knows that he will be changed. Okay, those are predictable environments. When the child feels like playing around, they know that some adult is going to come and play around with them. Okay, their brains are hardwired with more capacity to successfully function in an academic environment. Basically means their brains are going to do better in a classroom, just naturally. For children with healthy brain development, the neocortex has control. Remember, the smart brain has control over the survival impulses of the lower parts of the brain. So the student is able to control from the top down. The smart brain keeps the brain in check and can control the limbic system, remember, which is that center part of the brain where the survival brain stays, which is the center for our emotions. So basically, a child who comes from a healthy and predictable environment has more control over their emotions, or also is going to be better able to say, for instance, someone asked me this recently, but in the scary movie, how come the person always picks the bad thing? They got the car that's running that could get them out of there, and then there's the shed that is hidden with a whole bunch of really scary items. Why do they choose which? Which part of the brain do you think they're functioning at that moment? Exactly. They would be in survival brain, which is not the smart brain that says, well, the vehicle will be able to drive us out of here faster and potentially take us to a safe environment. Whereas survival brain is going to be like, oh, we need to hide, we need to get out of here, we just got to do something quick first, here, do that. That's how that works. So for children who, again, come from predictable environments and have healthy relationships, they're able to say, you know what, we should probably take that car. Let's go ahead and do that. It's safer. When a child is living under high stress or has had an intense history of trauma, this top-down control system fails, and the lower parts of the brain become more dominant in just about every area of life, though. In this bottom-up control system, whereby the midbrain is in charge, life happens in the next 15 seconds. So this explains why students who are dysregulated are functioning from the part of the brain where there is no reason, there's no connection to consequences, and no care for anyone but themselves. And generally, these people are often called selfish, or they're called, you only think about yourself. Well, actually, their brain is hardwired that way. They've had to think of themselves their entire life. They had to think so fast, otherwise they were going to miss the meal. And so when we are functioning from that bottom-up control system, our survival brain is making our decisions. And so it is, some people say, well, I just have bad luck. Well, actually, probably not. It's probably because you're dysregulated, and we need to figure out a way to help calm and create a baseline for you so the survival brain can feel comfortable enough to turn off, and we can allow for smart brain to come back. Next slide, please. Do we get a break time? I hope so. Can we? I put it in my PowerPoint because I know it's a lot of information. And I know that the brain can only absorb so much information at one time. So how about this? Everybody who is watching, I would like for you to please stand up and please take a few minutes to unwind, relax. But the goal, please, is going to be to move your body. If you stand up, it'll allow for your brain to kind of reset, and it'll allow for whatever levels of stress you're experiencing from this PowerPoint to kind of slow down. So let's give it a few minutes. We'll be back at 1:57. Is it 1:55? Yes, and I will start talking again at 1:57. But please move. Okay. Okay. I'll do a little mic check, but can you guys hear me? Are you guys able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you, Anne. Okay, I know that was a quick break, but again, there's so much information, and I just want to make sure that we get through as much as we possibly can. And I probably shouldn't have read the Q&A because I think it gave me a little bit of anxiety. This will all be emailed to all of you guys from what I'm reading too. And at the end, you will get some contact information so that if you ever have any questions or you want to figure out how you could help better in your role within your organization, I'd love to be a source to reach out to. Okay. So let's begin. Next slide, please. I hope you did move because, again, all of this information, again, it is so much and it can overwhelm your stress response system, and especially if it's hitting a little bit close to home. So make sure your body does get some movement, okay? Whether it be just getting up and sitting back down, it'll help for the absorption of the new material to kind of sit, okay? Now, I like to include symptomology because the better we are able to identify it, the better we are able to actually support or understand or help even ourselves. So I'm a firm believer of the name it to tame it, okay? Because if we know what it is, we'll know how to fix it. Adults can identify children experiencing trauma by looking for the behavioral, emotional, and social cues. I have learned throughout my career that you can also do the same thing for adults. And I put in this PowerPoint specifically, this is my first time that I'll go over it, is defense mechanisms that are used by adults. Because if we understood them better as like a society, we would stop taking things so personal. People are not mad at us generally when they display anger. They have underlying unresolved issues. And unfortunately, sometimes we are the butt end of that. So I'm going to make sure we understand that too. And in the process, we're going to learn the symptomology for a lot of these other ACEs. Next slide. So common symptoms following exposure to trauma. These, again, although the research does come from children, it's still 0 to 22 years old. And a lot of these symptoms can still be seen in adults. So behaviorally, children who've experienced ACEs often have either antisocial behavior or have very emotional, like outburst behavior. And so you'll see too a change in activity. Children change very distinctly when they are experiencing ACEs. For instance, I'll give an example on this one. Okay, so the teacher sends me an email, a concerned teacher, and she says, this student, we'll call her Renee. Renee is this bubbly, beautiful little girl. She talks so much that I've actually had conversations with her about allowing for other kids to have turns. And, you know, she's just always involved, always wants to answer all the questions, so happy. And then when she returned from Christmas break, now she doesn't talk. She does not participate. And often when I tell her, you need to participate, she responds with, I'm sorry. She said this child was never apologetic before, and now she's displaying complete opposite of behavior. And this is the teacher sending me this, right? And that's all that she gave me from there. Although that is all she gave me, I think that just told us the whole world of what could potentially be happening. This child had experienced a traumatic event. This is a change in activity, and now she's displaying antisocial behavior, meaning she does not want to participate. She does not want to be in the limelight. She has a change in the way she's communicating. And so ultimately, of course, as a social worker, though, I get to the bottom of it. And this child has been, her and her mom fled from an abusive home and are now living in a safe home. And so the whole child's life has changed. And so these symptoms that we see, we can actually name them, and we can say, this child has experienced ACEs. Or in her situation, an ACE. Not only did her parents are getting divorced, but she witnessed domestic violence. Now she is currently homeless. So she has 3 ACEs in a matter of a winter break vacation. When we think cognitively, remember, this is the smart brain. So common symptoms following exposure to trauma, you're going to see confusion, or like when you're speaking to someone and you think to yourself, what part are you not getting? What part don't you understand? Believe it or not, the brain, remember that smart brain, may not even be turned on. Or, unfortunately, it did not develop to its optimal levels yet. And so they have difficulty understanding too much information at once. They may have intrusive images, meaning they re-experience the event through memories. They have poor attention, poor concentration, poor decision making, and poor problem solving. These are all symptoms associated with childhood trauma, ACEs. Next slide, please. Emotionally, you're going to see agitation, frustration, but at high levels, guys, not just your regular teenager who, does not like the adults in their lives. I mean, like true agitation. In working with adults in the homeless population, every single one of them is agitated beyond understanding. Like, you just got here. What are you so upset about? Well, emotionally, that is their go-to emotion, is frustration, agitation, and anger. But they have every reason to be so, and especially if they're living in survival brain on a constant state. Depression, denial. Denial, I'm going to talk about a little bit more in depth because it is a coping strategy, a defense coping strategy that you will just, you're in denial of what your current circumstances are. And we'll talk about it later. Feeling overwhelmed. These people tend to exacerbate their stress response system, meaning they're already in a toxic stress environment, but then stress just keeps piling on from other activities as well. So they're always overwhelmed. Then they have fear, guilt, and grief. And I'm going to be a little vulnerable right now and explain, I have a very high ACE score. And one of the major symptoms that I got from my ACEs is this feeling of fear and guilt and grief, even when it's not an appropriate emotion for the given circumstance that I'm in. And it's something that I have to work on, and something that I need to, become aware of and ultimately repair and heal from. So a lot of people that we're working with too, you'll see them just say like, oh, I'm so sorry. I don't even know why I just did that. And it doesn't even warrant an apology. They just have this overwhelming sense of guilt or fear or grief. That is a common symptom associated with childhood adversity. Then we have an inappropriate emotional response. How many of us hang out with people and like something funny happens, but then all of a sudden it's like they're crying, or like it was so funny that they just can't stop laughing, and it's just kind of like it doesn't warrant the exact event. So they have an inappropriate emotional response. Then we have physically, we get chills, difficulty breathing. It feels like there's like pressure on our chest. We can feel dizzy, fainting, fatigue. Then we have somatic symptoms. Somatic symptoms are when we start to feel as if we're sick, and we start to think that we're sick, and it happens. You start to get nervous and you're like, oh my gosh, I think my stomach's about to start hurting. I'm getting so nervous, and then all of a sudden your stomach starts hurting. Or I've seen this one very often in younger adolescents, where they're just like, oh no, that's going to make me throw up. Oh no, I don't want to do that. There's too many people. I'm going to throw up, and then they throw up. Those are somatic symptoms. They're manifested from our actual thoughts and feelings. Then we got sweating, twitching, and weakness. Weakness and fatigue kind of occur as physical symptoms because we end up tensing our bodies from whatever it is that we're experiencing, but we're usually in a high tense situation. And so it causes us to feel so tired by the end of the day. And hope you guys don't mind. I know I'm so, I move my hands a lot. So next slide, please. So the effects on learning. This one, I feel that it's a very important understanding because a lot of times we'll say that, you know, like, oh, he just doesn't want to do it, or he just doesn't want to read, or he just never took the time to learn it himself. Well, remember that video that we just watched about how the brain centers are actually affected when you've experienced high levels of toxic stress? And again, we kind of learn too about all of those things that could affect and create toxic stress, such as the ACEs, the adverse childhood experience. Well, we now know that early stress caused from trauma and lack of positive early experiences, meaning that buffer, that caring adult, it takes a toll on the brain's ability to develop properly. So when we see these grown-ups who have learning deficiencies, such as like, which is often the one I come across, they tell me, oh, I don't know how to read. And I'm just like, okay, well, have you ever, you know, tried to learn it now? No, everyone just makes fun of me and I don't know how to read and it's not for me. They often have very high ACE scores too. And so we know, or I know, that there were damages to their developing brain and their neural architecture when they were at some point within their childhood. It decreases the size of brain centers that are associated with how language and numbers and control of emotions and social interactions are functioning. So again, these ACEs ultimately impact our learning. We don't process information maybe the same, or we have difficulty recalling memories, attention problems, problem-solving difficulties, decreased reading abilities, comprehension, verbal articulation. Verbal articulation means they generally have difficulty maybe expressing certain letters within the alphabet. And one that I've seen too is that the kindergartners or the first graders, they don't talk. They're nonverbal. Not that they really can't, but I think maybe just the brain might be taking a little bit longer to kind of develop and, you know, hone itself in on that skill. Next slide, please. So these defense mechanisms, this, you guys are my first on this one, but I just thought it's so important so that we understand that this is not about us when we're working with certain populations, and these would be some of the defense mechanisms, like the go-tos. It is not about us. So these are psychological defense mechanisms that help the ego cope with anxiety, frustration, and unacceptable impulses within ourselves. And I also put these on here too so that we could learn. We could learn from this and be better versions of ourselves. So rationalization. This is a defense process by which plausible reasons justify an action or a behavior. For instance, one that I commonly see, I say, how did your interview go? I didn't end up going. Well, why didn't you go? Because they weren't going to pick me anyways. Trust me. I walked in and I seen all the other people that were there to apply. They weren't going to pick me anyways. So I just decided to leave. That is a defense mechanism. For one, he didn't even try it because he rationalized. He rationalized within himself. We do this often, and we see those that are working in addiction counseling or even families too that I work with. They rationalize for or justify a reason for their actions or their behaviors. This helps a person cope with disappointments by blaming external circumstances. I also thought this to be such a beneficial tool because, again, for us, it will help us grow and be better as individuals. We are all a little guilty of rationalization. And so the better we understand it, the better we can also name it to tame it for the people that we're working with. I put an example here. An abused adult may rationalize hitting her children as punishment after being hit by her spouse. Displacement. Displacement is a defense mechanism in which affect is transferred from one object to another. So a person uses this when he compulsively eats lollipops after quitting smoking. Displacement means you put your emotions from one object to another. Next slide, please. Reaction formation. This is something I'm working on, and I think that it is a learned behavior from, again, stemming from my childhood. And so I share this because I want to normalize these defense mechanisms with everybody. There's nothing wrong with doing whatever we had to do to get where we are now, but understanding too that we are in a safe place in our adult world, in our adult lives, that we can learn to say, okay, I don't need to use a defense mechanism here. It is okay to be me and be happy with me. So reaction formation is a process by which unacceptable impulses are expressed as their opposites. This helps release anxiety and guilt associated with the true impulse. An example, an angry employee uses reaction formation when being overly nice to their supervisor that they secretly do not like. And so reaction formation, defense mechanism, important to understand, because then you'll think when you're working with people and, for instance, they're doing really well, they're liking everybody, and they just talk about how much they love the whole program and everything, and then they quit or they don't ever do any of the skill building that you tell them to do. It could potentially be reaction formation. They're expressing their opposite. And then projection. Projection we see a lot in the movies and things like that, but it places unacceptable feelings from the person feeling them onto another person. Okay, projection is a defense mechanism that often hurts the people we do not want to hurt. Often hurts the people that are there to support us. So projection is something we should all definitely work on, but this one I say because our mentees, most of the time, they will project onto us what they're truly feeling. And then we take it personal, and then it ruins a relationship. If we understand these defense mechanisms, again, we'll be better able to understand that when they cursed us out and told us they hated us and that we were no good at anything and we are just terrible, they could have been projecting. And that is how they feel about themselves. And then they set it and try to place that upon us. Okay, so an example, a person is projecting when he is complaining that no one likes him, but in reality, he does not like himself or anyone else. Then denial. Denial distorts reality, and it does not acknowledge emotion. Okay, and I want us to understand this too, because denial is one of the defense mechanisms that a lot of the people we're serving in these vulnerable populations often express. So when a person continues to eat unhealthy foods despite his doctor's orders to eat healthy, okay, that's an example. Another example of denial is someone coming to our AA or NA meetings and then still using drugs outside of the program. Okay, that's denial. Denial, although it is a defense mechanism, it's often one that continues to harm and ultimately ruin a lot of relationships. Next slide. All right. I know I'm talking fast, guys, and it is probably one of my coping strategies when I'm feeling a little nervous. This is positive stress that I'm experiencing, and I'm aware, but nonetheless still stress. So I'll slow down for you. Becoming trauma informed. Before you got all of this heavy information put on you, I said in the beginning, we'll understand why we need to become trauma informed. Why is this term being thrown everywhere? Why does every organization need to incorporate some form of systemic change and become trauma informed? All this information you just got, that's why. You want to be the best version of yourself, then understand where you come from and what you've experienced and how it ultimately affects you. You want to become trauma informed because the populations that you're serving who are asking for your support and help, whether it be through a mentorship, whether it be through a clinic, whether it be through substance abuse counseling or mental health, they have gone through this and they need someone to understand their symptoms, understand their coping strategies, and be that buffer for them. Next slide. So, how to help a child recover. I put it as child again because, for one, if we start there, the outcome in adulthood, of course, is going to be significantly better. But ultimately, these things apply to all of us, all the way to 130 years old. We need to ensure safety around everyone we're with. Okay, so how do we help a child recover? How do we help an adult recover? We offer safety within our context of area, okay? We talk to them about their fears, their worries, you know, and we seen that video earlier with Ephraim. He said when he had mentioned that this person kept countering his doubts, and every time I felt like I couldn't do it, you know, she just kept telling me that I could. She was talking to him about his fears. His doubts were himself. She incorporated safety in their relationship and in their environment that allowed for him to build a healthy relationship. So on this third one, talking to them about healthy relationships, this is important too, because when we grow up in a toxic environment, we tend to think that sometimes abuse is natural, that it's normal. And ultimately, it is acceptable behavior because it becomes normalized. And so a lot of the people that I help, and unfortunately, even my family personally, domestic violence being so natural that it was normalized, that wasn't the problem within their relationship. And so we need to change that. We need to normalize that it is not normal to experience any type of abuse in a healthy relationship. So teach those around you that a healthy relationship consists of communication and love and holding your baby all day if you want to. Because, you know, coming from a Hispanic community or family, I should say, it was said that you shouldn't carry your baby because you're going to spoil him. You know, research has proved that that is not accurate. The more support and love that children get, the better developed their brains and bodies will be. Talk about boundaries. This is something that does need to be talked about as well, because when we set healthy boundaries, we do better. And this is within ourselves too. In order to set a healthy boundary, you need to understand what it is that you're feeling. You got to name it to tame it, right? So you're around a certain person, and every time you're around this person, you get a feeling, and that feeling is not comfortable. It's not something you like. Then you have to stop and reflect and think, okay, what do I need to do here? I need to set a healthy boundary. This person is overstepping their boundaries with me, and it makes me uncomfortable. So talk about boundaries, and let's make sure that we know it is okay to tell someone, you know what, I do not like the way that you talk to me, and it makes me feel very sad and disrespected. I would appreciate it if we do not speak to each other like this. And if we have disagreements, that we're able to just say, you know what, I don't like this. Can you please stop? And that's it. And if we cannot communicate to each other like that, we should not communicate to each other at all. That is a healthy boundary that we need to be okay with. Getting professional help. A therapist does not mean you're crazy, okay? It means that you need someone to help you understand your thoughts. Therapists do not give you medication, okay? And they're there to help you, again, through venting and understanding your past and understanding your present and even your future. So get professional help, and let's normalize receiving therapy for everyone, men, women, and children. Next slide, please. So the core values, this is something that we're going to see everywhere when we think of trauma-informed care. I want us to be able to understand that there are core values associated with trauma-informed care. In order to be trauma-informed, you need to educate yourself. So all that information that I just kind of dumped on you fairly quickly within the last hour and a half, that's the first step. And then understanding these core values would be the second step. Understanding that trauma-informed care means to be trustworthy, means to incorporate safety everywhere. It means, and when I say everywhere, I mean within yourselves, guys, within your areas. You can only have control over yourself and your small bubbles. Remember that. And then offer choice. We need to allow for people to become empowered and choose their destinies. So choice is important, and it is a core value. Collaboration means to be able to talk to each other throughout every aspect, meaning on a person-to-person level, on an organizational level, and a community level. Let's all work together to maximize all of the supports for an individual. Empowerment. We need to empower everybody all the time. Let's make it to where we tell people, you can do it. You've got this. You matter and you're important. So these are the core values. Next slide, please. So what can we do? Well, and I know I'm reiterating here, but I'm a firm believer that if we hear it more than once, even if it's within the same PowerPoint, we'll understand it maybe a little bit better and we'll reach more people because everybody hears something different, even though it might be the same words. So what can we do? We can learn how to effectively and actively listen. That means effective listening does not require a response every single time. Listening and being present is more powerful than offering advice to people. Okay? And I want us really to soak that one in, because sometimes we always feel like we need to fix people's problems. We don't need to fix people. We don't need to do things for anyone else. People will do them for themselves, but we just need to be actively and effectively listening when they're talking. Become trauma sensitive. You are trauma sensitive when you understand the core values and these little strategies and resources. You are trauma sensitive when you understand how ACEs affect people. Understand what has happened to the traumatized child before trying to fix their behavior. So remember those symptomologies that we kind of went over, well, the symptoms. Understand what has happened. Build relationships. Remember, it takes only one caring adult to really help someone recover and heal from ACEs. Engage in positive, productive rapport. You did an amazing job. You didn't get this position, but I have no doubt that you're going to learn from this experience and you're going to be that much better for your next job interview. So good job at attending and getting there on time and giving it your best, and let's keep trying. Connect and link youth and their families. This is another way to say getting professional help, but also too for those families who need other services. I just got told was it this week that CityServe helped an entire family out with groceries, and they absolutely loved it, and she couldn't have been more grateful. So let's connect and link families, and those are those basic needs. Next slide, please. So I put this here so that we can kind of understand the benefits. When I say kind of, I hope to just mean gain more perspective. So you've got the person and the caring adult, the mentor perhaps. And remember, a child, youth, adult, whoever it is that you are mentoring or even assisting within whatever capacity, relationships are going to shape the neural system of their brain response system. Okay, and this will end up being how they kind of identify relationships. It'll also mean how they identify resources within their communities. And it can become the template that molds all future responses within that person. Okay, so for instance, and I thought this was so sweet, and I know we don't have a whole bunch of time, but someone told me, and he's a 64-year-old homeless veteran, and I was assisting him at the hospital and kind of helping him through his his entire stay. And then he says to me, I forgot that there were still good people. And I said, excuse me? And I go, I don't understand. And he goes, I forgot that there were still good people out there. And he goes, and you're right. I should be using my Social Security check to pay for housing instead of doing what I am doing with it. And he goes, if you're willing to help me, I'm ready to go ahead and get somewhere to stay and get off the streets. And he said, thank you. That relationship that we built there ultimately kind of connected and provided safety, provided trust, empowerment, because it was ultimately his decision to then find housing. And I think it kind of created a new template about healthy relationships. And that was done with love, right? So then he ends up on this side of the little system that I have up here on this PowerPoint versus chaos. Next slide. So these strategies here, these come with research, and you'll also find them in this link that I provided. And I know the link is titled for educators, but that's who I can't change the name anymore. But these strategies are for everybody. And they also, again, there's a lot of other things in there too. And if you're like me and you just love to read about research articles and kind of figure out the best evidence-based practices, there are lots of articles in there as well about trauma. In particular, probably PTSD, because it is a common symptom associated with childhood trauma. But anyways, trauma-informed strategies, creating safety. How many times have we heard that now? But it is ultimately one of the best things that we can do, because when we feel safe, who turns off? Survival brain. Survival brain turns off and says, oh, okay, so there isn't a threat. We're good. This person cares about me, and they said they'd never let anything happen to me, so I think I'm going to go ahead and shut off. Hey, smart brain, will you turn back on? And it allows for the child or the adult to be able to use their smart brain. Avoid re-traumatization and victimization. This is important. Sometimes we don't realize that we're doing it though, but sometimes when we make someone retell their story over and over and over, we are re-traumatizing them over and over and over. And when we call them victims, sometimes it kind of can be a little dehumanizing as well. So let's call them survivors, because that is what you are when you've survived ACEs. You are a survivor. And so call it like it truly is. We promote empowerment through that. So we increase the assets and protective factors. Adults who are caring and loving are protective factors. Securing his driver's license, and I'm referring to Ephraim again in that video, we're increasing his assets and providing more protective factors for successful futures. We're reducing the risks and mitigating their trauma. These are trauma-informed strategies, and I'm just tying it back to this so we can see it in real life versus me giving a definition. But mitigating trauma is also a ways to ensure that we heal from the trauma, not just suppress it and say, you know what, I'm successful now, I'm doing well, that never happened, I'll be fine. We want to heal from it and ultimately help each other in the process. Strength-based language, the most beneficial and wonderful thing we could really do for each other, especially if you're a mentor. Use strength-based language with the people you are helping, with your mentees. Strength-based language. You did an amazing job at going to your doctor's appointment without even having a reminder. You did great. Strength-based language to yourself. I am strong and I am smart. And when I tell myself, you are beautiful and there is nothing you cannot do. Strength-based language is a very powerful tool. Next slide, please. And I'm glad I can't see no one, because then I feel like I'm really talking to myself, and so it kind of makes it a little bit easier for me to tell you guys my little vulnerable secrets. By the way, strength-based language can be done in the mirror, which is where I do it, and very powerful. These strategies here, we hear about them all the time, right? So meditation, relaxation, oh, I don't even have it on here, but deep breathing, important for people who've experienced ACEs. Deep breathing is one of the best strategies at telling the survival brain, you're not needed, all right? See how calm and quiet and collective my body is? We don't need you right now, survival brain. Deep breathing and relaxation and meditation have that effect. If you could incorporate them with every time you come across someone you know is experiencing toxic stress, you would be a lot more successful in not only teaching them new tricks, skills, tools, but ensuring that they actually store it in long-term memory. Remember that, because survival brain will not remember anything that is happening if it is not relevant to their survival. So community building activities. This is more of a ensuring that someone gets connected to their community, and ensuring, and when I say their community, that could be their support group, it could be their whoever is working with them, and ensuring relationship building within that organization or within that mentorship, relationship, whatever it be. And mentorship with peers. I put this on here because, well, research proves too that mentorship is actually very effective. It could provide that one caring adult that someone needs to help buffer against the effects of childhood trauma. When space is dirty and cluttered, we naturally can, it can create a little bit of stress within our bodies. Okay, so we do need things to be cleaned, and we do need to have clutter moved away, because people, again, with high ACE scores, the brain, being that it develops a little differently, too much clutter can feel like chaos and can create stress. So someone who's already on high alert, it could be a trigger. Social emotional learning. This is super important because people hear often, I hear them say things like, gosh, that kid has no manners. Or, oh my gosh, that grown-up, did you see him? No wonder why the kid acts like that. Or I'll hear, why are they talking like that still? Like, he's a grown-up. Why is he talking like that? Or how can he not know how to do a resume? He's 30 years old. Or how can, just all of this, right? Social emotional learning is skill building curriculum, basically. But we cannot expect people to behave or talk or even know how to do something that they've never been taught, guys. That is a ridiculous way of thinking, by the way, because you can't expect someone to do something they've never learned how to do. Think about that for a second, because sometimes we get too quick to judging, and sometimes maybe even start to compare. Common sense is not common. Common sense is more of a cultural or a family dynamic. You are going to learn all of the common things within your family. So someone had told me, can you pass me a, I don't remember what it's called, but I'm just going to say, I think he said a flathead screwdriver. And I'm like, what is that? I'm going to assume and use my school brain, and my smart brain is going to say, look for something that has got a flat tip on it. But that's me just thinking, you know. But if you ask anybody else, and then he says, well, how can you not know that? That's common sense. That is not common sense. Just like someone had said to me, like, how can he not know to say please and thank you every single time that, you know, it requires or, you know, needs a please and thank you? That's common sense. No. Okay, that is not common sense. Let's provide more social emotional learning. Let's provide more skill building, and let's teach them these expectations that we have. Okay? If we assume that people have them, not only will you be disappointing yourself, but you're going to make someone feel inadequate. And again, it goes back to that whole toxic stress feeling of I'm not good enough, I don't know how to do it, I'm just going to go back to where I came from, where everyone else is the same as me. Next slide, please. So the best practical ways, and I know I'm reiterating, but again, I hope we're all getting some of this sticking somewhere. Being fully present. What does that mean? A lot of us don't do it anymore. We're not mindful of our time. So for instance, if you're multitasking while watching this video, you are not fully present. If you are doing anything that is two things at one time, you are not fully present. Listening and responding. Listening and responding. Sometimes no response is needed, and that's when you're best listening, is when you get to know and understand no response is needed. Provide social support and encourage others to connect with their friends and family for support. So be there for someone, but understand that you need to help these people mostly at finding other support systems. Encourage other relationships to be built or developed or hemmed, because in the end, you do not want anybody becoming dependent on you when you know you're not forever. Understand that role, and understand too that the best thing we can do as mentors, as therapists, as counselors, whatever it may be, is to connect, provide that social support to empower them, teach them their social skills through social emotional learning on how to build and develop healthy relationships outside of yourself. Name it to tame it. Teach them about their feelings. I see that you're frustrated right now. It looks like you're, really sad. It looks like you're not feeling well. Tell me what you're feeling right now. Well, I'm feeling mad, I'm angry. But what are you mad or angry about? And what you're going to do when you do that is you'll also learn too that a lot of people hide their underlying emotions with one specific emotion. And I'm sure we could all guess what that one specific emotion is going to be. Anger is a go-to emotion that helps cover other true emotions. So helping people identify that will also help aggression, outbursts, and also to just make people more aware and in tune of their own true feelings. Teach the youth, teach them about their fight, flight, freeze. I like to tell them that they're using their survival brain and we need their smart brain, so let's breathe it out. Remember, a breathing strategy, again, has so many actual benefits to the body. It helps with the digestive system. It helps circulate oxygen throughout the body. It helps reduce the cortisol and adrenaline levels in your body, which thus results in turning off survival brain. Be aware of your own nonverbals and those of the youth. How many of us have ever been around someone that when you were talking to them, you could see like an entirely different response occurring on their face? Or how about just like when you're talking to someone and they just always look like so annoyed and frustrated, like you are taking up their time? Be aware of your own nonverbals, especially when someone is telling you something very, like when they're putting themselves in a vulnerable position and they're expressing something that is like maybe a secret to them or very difficult for them to share, because our responses will ultimately trigger a response back to them. Okay, so be aware of your own nonverbals. We say more with our body than we do with our words. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to talk lightly on mentorship, understanding our role as a mentor. It is important to understand that a mentor plays a very crucial part of a relationship. And so a mentor may share with a mentee or protege information about his or her own career path, as well as provide guidance, motivation, emotional support, and or role modeling. And a mentor may help with exploring careers, setting goals, developing contacts, and identifying resources. Next slide. They are like a coach, a source of encouragement, a resource person. Remember that linking that we talked about, getting them to the right organizations? They're going to be their champion. And they will also play devil's advocate. Next slide. So the role of a mentor, when we understand what it is we're doing when we're in our positions, the better at them we can become. So I hope that you take this information and do with it as you will. And remember, I'm not telling anybody how to do something. It's more so that we can all learn and gain just a little bit of information in some new way, form, or fashion. Okay. The role of a mentor, assist with, as a coach, assist with solution development and guidance, share ideas, and provide feedback. We cannot tell people what to do or what you think is best. That is not the way that it works. To be a mentor, we have to allow for people to understand that it is their path and it is their life to ultimately live, and that you will be there to help guide them in the direction that is going to be their choice, but most beneficial for them as well. So this one I want to talk about on devil's advocate. When appropriate, play devil's advocate to help mentees think through important decisions and strategies. I will give an example. He comes to me and he tells me, you know what, the coach told me that if I'm late, that if I'm more than 15 minutes late, that he's going to make me run for 20 minutes. So I'm just going to quit. I'm not gonna play the baseball team anymore because I'm gonna be late every single time. I have to take my little brother home first. There's nobody to walk him home. All right, so it sounds like you're gonna plan to quit the thing that you love the most because there's, a priority that you have to do first. Is that what you're saying? Yeah, that's what it's gonna go. I'm not gonna run every single time. Well, what other ways do you think that you could solve this problem? Well, there aren't any other ways. Do you think that you could talk to someone about it first and see if there's a way to work around it? Or are you just going to quit the thing that you love the most because, there's no other way? Well, I guess I could talk to the coach about it. Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. I think you're right. You should talk to the coach about it. It's their idea. And it's you playing devil's advocate in the sense of, well, if you do that, this might happen. Or if you do this instead, this might happen. And the idea is you're never going to tell them what to do or how to do it or which way is the best way to do it. Instead, you allow for them to create the idea themselves. And ultimately, you're empowering them. You're giving them choice. And those are those core values that we were talking about. But ultimately, it helps create a sense of independence in their own choices. And they will never blame you when things don't work out. Next slide, please. Whew. The kids who need the most love will ask for it in the most unloving of ways. I want us to remember that, okay? And I didn't read through the whole slide of the mentorship one here because I do want to allow for us to have some time for questions. And I do want us to be able to ask anything openly and freely. The slides will be posted or sent to you, I believe. But first and foremost, I want to thank you for your time today. And I want to thank you for being one of the best parts of our community in ensuring successful futures for our vulnerable populations. So thank you and keep being amazing. And end. Thank you, guys.
Okay, Stephanie, we just have a few questions and I'll go ahead and get started and read them off to you, okay?
Okay.
So, can the smart brain develop during adulthood if it didn't develop early on in childhood due to trauma?
Absolutely. So our brains are, the technical term is going to be malleable, but technically that old saying that old dogs can't learn new tricks, out the window, completely not true. Our brains can continue to learn and continue to develop all the way through our last breath. If you want to learn something new, you can, absolutely. That is why it is so important for us to understand ourselves and our role within childhood trauma so that we can restore those parts of our brains too. So absolutely.
Okay.
Great question.
Our next question is there a way to reverse this in adults? How do we help adults or children understand what's making them behave this way? For example, someone who's angry all the time.
By understanding ACEs alone, we understand our own risk for our health problems or our own association with our symptoms. So I think it is highly important that we educate people about ACEs so that in our ACE score, so that we could better understand our behaviors. For example, now that I understand ACEs and I understand that what I went through in childhood was not normal or healthy, I'm going to ensure that I change that dynamic for my children, and so that the trauma stopped there and there is no generational trauma, and it's done, and it will be a different path for the future. And that's what understanding ACEs for me has done. I hope that answered the question.
Great. Okay, the next one is there a way to treat the symptoms and anxiety that follow trauma, or do you have to treat the root cause?
Yes and yes to both of those questions. Ideally, you want to treat the root cause to any circumstance. When you get to the root of something, the plant will no longer grow. Therefore, you have just nipped the whole thing altogether. The best way to do that would be, of course, through therapy. Therapy does not, again, require medication. A lot of people have associated therapy as a way of being weak or needing medication and things like that. That is false. To get to the root cause is very difficult to do, something I'm still working on. And what it does, though, it'll help you understand that a lot of our core values within ourselves, they are probably not the most healthy things that we could have. And so ultimately results in more toxic stress within adulthood. So, or you can learn all of these amazing strategies that I kind of named and fix your anxiety as it occurs on the daily basis with those breathing strategies or with relaxation strategies, or you'll see in that Google link that I handed out, I have lots of handouts on, for instance, like this. I don't know. Oh, it's white. You can't see it. It's a coping strategies list from 1 to 100 on things you can do to help with anxiety. So your choice, really. Do you want to have something to do every day, or do you want to get to the root cause and not have to worry about it?
Great. Okay. Next question. How can we validate someone without reinforcing their issues?
Validate someone without reinforcing their issues. Well, this would be, of course, dependent on the circumstance, because you know, if he did something terrible that is against the law, you probably don't want to validate. But if it's not that serious, I would say something like, you did the best you could given your circumstances. There are a lot of other ways that we could have taken care of this situation. Would you like to go over those so that you know how to do it better next time? That's what I would say.
Right. Okay. And last one, and it seems as if this person is looking for more guidance. How do I help a child who gets very upset when dealing with homework? How do you get them started without getting them angry?
Children will feed off of a lot of our emotions too. So if you're going in already knowing that it's going to be a struggle and that it's going to be something difficult, or you go in with a negative affect, it'll be reciprocated, and children are going to usually give it right back to us. And so there's that for starters. For second, some children are overwhelmed by a lot of tasks at once, my son being one of them. And so I have to break it into pieces. Like, okay, hey, it's time to do 5 minutes of your homework. And as soon as you get 5 minutes, you get 5 minutes of playtime. And so that is how I do it. And I break up his 30-minute homework assignment into 5 minutes. Is that super long and tedious and terrible maybe for me? Yes, but what would be worse? Me yelling at him, which I have done too. You know, we're all guilty of it. Yelling at him and telling him, hurry up and just get it done so we both can get out of here. So either way, people think of it in a sense of which would you prefer? And the 5-minute thing works phenomenal because you're breaking it down. And it's also a tool that you want to use for children who have ADHD. You want to break it down. The more you break it down, the easier it becomes, and the tasks are smaller, so it doesn't cause anxiety, it doesn't frustrate, and it won't overwhelm them. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. And it looks like we have actually one more question, and it's a pretty good one. What is the earliest age that you recommend a child can start trauma therapy, specifically for children between the ages of 2 to 5?
I have seen therapists begin therapy at 2 years old. So unfortunately not in my county, but I don't know, maybe something has changed here in Kern County, but I think a child should be receiving therapy as soon as they possibly can, and play therapy is an option for those children who've experienced unfortunate traumatic events in early childhood. I have a family member whose child, domestic violence was a major part of her relationship, and so her child started displaying very difficult, challenging behaviors as early as 1.5 years. And he was in therapy at 2 years old, and he's an entirely different child now at 5 years old. But it was a consistent therapy from 2 to 5. So a lot of that is dependent on our services that we have available within our communities. But 2.
All right, thank you so much. That was your very last question. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us before I close us out?
No, now I can breathe. Thank you guys so much for your time. I appreciate all of the help too from all of you guys.
No, thank you. That was an amazing session. There was so much good information that I know we're all going to be digesting for a very, very, very long time. And thank you to all of our attendees for staying with us through our technical difficulties, for coming back. This has been our final session of this year's Hope Through Mentoring Conference, and it would not have been possible without many hours of hard work from our partners at AmeriCorps, Kern County Superintendent of Schools, Garden Pathways, Kern Behavioral Health and Recovery Services, the Department of Human Services, and many more. Thank you to all of these organizations for your hard work and for making this conference possible. And thank you to all of our attendees for sharing with us your time and for working so hard to make our community stronger through mentoring. Just a reminder that there will be a survey emailed out to you after this session, and your feedback on that is very much appreciated. Those surveys help us to know what content is helpful to you, and it helps us to understand what works and what doesn't work so well for these conferences. Also, if you would like to stay up to date on what we are doing here at Drug Free Kern throughout the year, please find us on Twitter and Facebook. We are at Drug Free Kern. On those pages, we share the videos we produce, information for conferences like these, and we will be debuting our new podcast next week. It's If I Knew Then, Prevention Through Recovery. That's coming next week. And again, those pages are at Drug Free Kern on both Facebook and Twitter. We also had some comments in the chat about Wednesday's session. That video has been recorded. It will be emailed out with your surveys today, along with all of the handouts that Stephanie mentioned throughout her presentation. So that email is going to have a lot of good stuff in it, and make sure and keep an eye out for that. That's it for us. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and I look forward to seeing you in person at next year's conference. Enjoy the rest of your day.